Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Bonnie Stewart, VP and General Counsel for the Connecticut Business and Industry Association. Bonnie was actually on the show a couple of years ago, and I would imagine a little bit has happened since then in our great state, so welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We actually were going to have you on a week earlier, but I think the timing is perfect because we allowed the governor's budget address to occur, and that'll certainly give us something to talk about on the show today, right?
Absolutely.
Well, why don't we start with that? Just sort of well, you know what? Before we start with that, maybe we should give the people a background on the Connecticut Business and Industry Association. What is that?
Sure. CBIA represents Connecticut employers, job creators, and we advocate on behalf of them before the state agencies and the legislature. And we try to help them in terms of complying with the law, best practices, a variety of different areas. So we're really there to basically help Connecticut businesses.
So you're independent.
We're independent.
You're not affiliated necessarily with anybody that could like lean you in one direction or another. Nobody can lobby you, right?
No, we're the one and only.
Yes, there you go. And general counsel, that means you're a lawyer?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so the law always comes in handy when you're trying to help out with businesses, I would imagine, right?
Absolutely.
So, just recently, we had the governor's budget address. What was your take on it? What did your constituents, if that's the word to use, what did they think about it?
I would say that it's very fair to say that our membership had significant concerns with the governor's proposal.
Did they have concerns before the address actually occurred?
I think that everyone's a little bit concerned with Connecticut's fiscal situation. One of the things that makes a big difference to a company as to whether or not they should invest in a state is its fiscal situation.
What is its situation?
And unfortunately, we're running a deficit, an expected deficit, and the next 2 years look like they're going to be a little bit worse. So in fairness to the governor and the legislature, they're not in an easy situation, so they need to take a step back and look at where we're at, where we want to go, and how best to get there. So the governor last week did propose his plan for doing that. We have real concerns with it because we think there's certain aspects of the proposal that will really cause some hardship here in Connecticut. One of the best ways to get out of a bad fiscal situation is to grow your economy. And unfortunately, we feel there are a number of proposals in the governor's overall budget package that would actually have the opposite impact. So what we're looking for at this point is for the legislature to scrutinize the proposal very carefully and decide what we need to do to grow our economy, to grow revenues, to grow ourselves out of this fiscal situation that we're currently in, and also to help along with that, find out ways we can become leaner.
Now, if a governor has presented his ideas, wouldn't he have staff or people that certainly would be aware that what he's proposing would actually be a negative for business in Connecticut and not a positive? And why would he want to go with it?
I think that it's impossible for everybody to know everything. Prior to my joining CBIA, I wasn't aware of a lot of these different tax measures and the impact they would have on a company's desire to grow in your state or grow somewhere else. So the governor does have experts around him. But when he sits down to put together his package, he can't have everybody in the room.
And you can't please everybody either.
And you can't. And I don't know a single governor who's ever put out a perfect budget. That's why we've got lots of people looking at it and offering suggestions. And that's exactly what's happening now. So the legislature now has the governor's package before them. They'll hold a public hearing. They'll receive different input, both on the spending side as well as the revenue side. And in the end, they'll put out what they believe is the best package.
Whenever you have, if the state's in a deficit, I assume that part of it is going to be new taxes, correct?
Right, and I think what's more important is while we would like to see no new taxes, the different taxes that are suggested, even their suggestion actually can slow down growth, even if something doesn't happen with it later.
Just because people just get it in their mind and they don't want to invest, right?
And one of the things that companies do is they don't make a decision now what they're going to do just this year and next year. The state looks at 2-year cycles. But companies look at 5, 10, and even longer, especially if they're doing research and development for any new products or they're deciding where to place a manufacturing line for a new product. So I'll give you one example. Down in this neck of the woods, we've got electric boat. Good for us. For development of a new submarine, it takes roughly 7 years in terms of research and development. afterwards, it's roughly 30 plus years for the manufacturing process.
Wow, that long for a
It
submarine,
is long.
huh?
It's
Wow.
great. It's great for southeastern Connecticut,
good for jobs,
definitely.
yeah.
Exactly. So that's a real long cycle. So when me, as a tax person for a company, is looking at where we should be for both the research and development and then later the manufacturing of that product, I'm not going to look at this year and next. I'm going to look at that environment as a whole. So even though we don't know exactly what the taxes are going to be 5 years, 10 years from now, if I've got someone saying to me that I'm going to take the research and development tax credit off the table, or I'm going to lower it this year unexpectedly, or I'm not going to allow something else to happen, it makes me question whether I should have any of those activities in that state versus another state that may not ever play with those specific economic incentives. So tax policy makes a huge difference in terms of the activities that take place in a state, not only in terms of the development process, but the manufacturing process as well. So when we're thinking about tax policy and growing our economy, we need to look at those policies that actually do spur growth. Unfortunately, some of those measures are under attack right now.
In the case of EB, though, it already exists in southeastern Connecticut. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that if they decide not to do something, they're the ones that affect the economy in the area because they're such a large employer in that neck of the woods, right? So it's because of them. If they decide not to do something, then that affects a lot of jobs in that neck of the woods because they're such a large employer, right?
Right, but where are we located?
In Connecticut, southeastern Connecticut.
Southeastern Connecticut, right next to Rhode Island. You know,
So in other words, they could pack their
unfortunately,
bags.
I'm not going to speak for Electric Boat. I don't know what they've got planned. But I do know that when we're looking at opportunities for Connecticut companies, we need to take into consideration what their opportunities are elsewhere. Massachusetts has a research and development tax credit that is unfortunately significantly better than ours. We've got other parts of our code right now that are better than theirs. So what I'm saying is that when we're looking at how best to grow our economy to get ourselves out of the fiscal situation we're in, first we need to look at tightening things up a little bit. You know, we all look at how we can do things more efficiently, more effectively, and Connecticut's going to be no different there. Connecticut's done some of those things, and I think our Department of Environmental and Energy Protection is an excellent example of some improvements that, an agency that's made some improvements.
To
But
themselves as an agency?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's more we can do, not only within that agency, but other agencies. So let's first, look at how we can do things better.
Look at ourselves within first?
Exactly. And then take those steps. Next, then we'll look at, all right, what can we do to incentivize activities here that will help grow our economy? Because when you've got a great economy, you don't have all the concerns regarding lagging revenues or stale job growth, those types of things. So we're saying that we really need to look at the state for everyone's sake with an eye at our economy, with an eye at improving economic activity here. And we've got those opportunities. Connecticut's a great state. We've got a lot of real positive qualities. We've got some challenges, but working together, we can overcome those.
Is a positive being halfway between New York and Boston just sort of a corridor going right through? I'm sure that's got to be a plus, or you could use it as a plus, right?
Absolutely. You know, transportation's not as important as it once was because we do have airplanes and internet, et cetera. But its location still matter, absolutely. And Connecticut, where it's located, yes, it's a perfect spot to be.
Well, then let's talk about transportation a little bit because that's one of those hot button topics. How do we start with that? Transportation, I know that they're talking about maybe adding some new lines, buses, trains. What's going on there?
That's a good question because one of the things that Connecticut could do better is improve our transportation infrastructure. So Connecticut right now, unfortunately, lags in the last fifth of the country in terms of our transportation infrastructure, and that's everything from ports, airports, highways, bridges, trying to remember everything that goes into those, but there's a lot there. And so that means there's opportunities for us. I think that fact that the governor has identified transportation infrastructure as a key component of our economy and a need to improve that system that we have currently in Connecticut is positive. The question is going to be, what projects come up first and how are they going to be paid for? We don't know any of that yet because the governor does have a plan, but we have to see what's been prioritized.
He wasn't specific about what he wants to do with it?
I'm sure in his overall plan before the Department of Transportation. He does have more specifics, but in terms of his budget address, not a ton of things were given because, let's face it, nobody's going to listen to an hour of, on I-84, on I-95.
We
but
should
we all
extend
care.
this here. Yeah,
exactly. But we do care what the end outcomes are. So they're going to prioritize the projects. We need to see what priorities what projects they're placing as a priority, and then how they're going to fund those. Nobody's ever said, oh, transportation isn't a good idea. It's always been, well, how are you going to fund it? And so in his budget address, the governor called for a commission to be formed to specifically identify how Connecticut's transportation infrastructure improvements would be paid for. Now, they're supposed to work together for 4 years to come up with these, magic bullets to tell us, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're either going to add this gas tax or this toll or whatever it may be. They weren't told you can do one thing or you have to do everything. They were given the leeway to identify the right ways.
Our gas is already high here in Connecticut,
yes,
by the
way.
Yes,
it is. Yeah. It is. But one of the things that we do need to figure out is how we're going to fund that system. Because we do have strong needs. Right here in southeastern Connecticut, we've obviously got rails, we've got bridge issues, we've got road issues, just like everyone else. We have a fantastic port. One of the things the governor is talking about that we think is a great idea is actually connecting everything better, making sure that we've got greater connectivity. And that's really positive for southeastern Connecticut because we do have a fantastic port here in New London.
We have cruise ships that come into New London in the summer, so I mean that's kind of a big deal,
It is. Economic development is extremely important. Tourism is a key part of that as well.
Transportation infrastructure, wouldn't that be one of the first things that you would improve on if you wanted to improve the overall economy of your state, to get people to invest here, to get people to move here, businesses? If your transportation infrastructure is not up to par, that's one of the first things that a business may opt to use as an excuse to decline coming here, right?
It is always a concern because people don't want to be seeing their costs increase because they've got a driver sitting on the road. You want to make sure that if you've got someone out there trying to move a product or move people, that they're actually moving. So that is a key issue. It's easy to say that's a priority. It's another thing to try to find a way to have everyone come together to finance that. So I don't think there's disagreement as to how important it is. The question is, can people get together and decide what's the best way to fund this and start moving on it? Because unlike, putting up a house, which you can do literally in a matter of a few weeks if you wanted to, but usually a few months, when you're talking about building or improving roads, bridges, rails, etc., that's something that takes years. And we need to start moving on it now if we're ever going to be part of the game.
One thing that I continue to complain about, and nobody else cares about it except me, is the completion of Route 11. So you have a highway shot from this part of the state to Hartford, but nobody else cares except me. So
I take that road too, so I'm right there with you.
All right. You mentioned tourism. And of course, that doesn't, unfortunately, that's not a big thing going on in Connecticut right now, too. I would imagine that some people might think that should be not as high on the priority list. So if there's something that's not going to get funded, if you don't have the money, that's certainly going to be one of them, unfortunately.
I think it really depends in terms of its level of importance to you based on where you live. There's certain parts of the state that rely heavily upon tourism. I think both the New London County, Middlesex County, it's a key issue. When you get to some of the other areas, it's not as great. But I do think that we all understand that if we can bring people into the state, so you're bringing revenues in here, you're importing that wealth to Connecticut, the better off we all are. I do believe that tourism is recognized by many as an important business sector in our state. It's going to be, again, its level of importance is going to vary a little bit depending on where you live and what industry you're currently involved in. But clearly in southeastern Connecticut, it's important.
Let's take a break because we've got a lot more to get to, and we'll come back. Is there a website people can go and learn more?
Absolutely, CBIA.com.
All right, we'll put a graphic up on the screen for that. Bonnie Stewart's the VP and General Counsel for CBIA, Connecticut Business and Industry Association. A short break, and then we're right back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. Bonnie Stewart's the VP and General Counsel of CBIA. It's almost easier to say the words than to say the acronym, Connecticut Business and Industry Association. We gave the website out a second right before we went to the break. What's on the website for people to see, by the way?
We have an update of various issues being dealt with in the state as a whole. So we talk about things like education, extremely important to our members and the people of Connecticut. We have topics on best practices within the workplace when it comes to labor and employment law matters, various tax policies to encourage economic activity here in Connecticut. We've got a ton of stuff there. So if you've got some time, definitely click CBIA.com. There's a ton of information.
You're on social media too for people to go and check out?
Yes, we are. We love Twitter. On Twitter all the time. And one of the reasons why we do that is it's a good way to keep people informed about what's going on without having to
Right. That's on their phone right there with them all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I live on those things in between phone calls and other things because it's a good way to find out what's happening throughout the state.
It sure is. You know, you mentioned education a minute ago. There wasn't a lot in the governor's budget address about education at all, was there?
No, there wasn't. He did mention that he'd like to move to full-day kindergarten throughout the state. But we didn't have specifics as to how that would happen. I think what's important to remember is the governor did pass comprehensive education reforms a couple years back. And implementation of those reforms is key to the success of the students here in Connecticut. And that's something that's going to have to take, unfortunately, it'll take some time. We need to get all those things implemented. So instead of proposing additional new items, they're asking that the measures that were already passed be fully implemented. There is some conversations about what should be happening at the higher education level, and there's discussion at the Capitol regarding education, higher ed in Connecticut. There's actually a planning commission on a higher education to make sure that students have the programs available to them that they need. There's a lot of talk up at the Capitol now about student debt. So I think that education is extremely important. Talk about skilled trades. You know, there's a real shortage in terms of skilled trades. All of that stuff is being talked about because everyone knows about how it impacts them in their own lives.
Yeah. One thing I want to get into a little bit more and dig in deeper is the transportation stuff because, you know, people can hear about it, but if you get real specific, for example, you know, a couple of new bus lines like the New Britain to Hartford bus line and the proposed New London Norwich bus line. Talk about that a little bit.
So there was a busway put in the Hartford area from New Britain to Hartford, as you pointed out. It hasn't started up yet, so we don't know the impacts it will have, but there is a push by many to have more or better mass transit. So we hear every day about what's happening in Metro North, and there's going to be...
Sometimes not good things.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's going to be an effort to improve those, because you're right, sometimes it's not good things. And one of the other things that's being talked about in terms of mass transit is possibly putting in a busway from New London to Norwich. Haven't heard much feedback on that yet, so I'm not sure where that's going to go, but that's one area. Another area is, in terms of mass transit focus, is the New Haven to Springfield corridor. There's talk about putting in a train there, right. So we actually have a line laid down, but it's a rail one way. We don't have a two-way rail right now. We don't have a double rail. So they would have to actually put down a second one if we would get the full benefit of having that rail line in. But that's something that's being talked about. People are talking about improvements because of the age of the infrastructure throughout southwestern Connecticut. So there's a lot to be done just in terms of maintenance. Forget making steps to take strides forward. So we do have a lot of opportunities. I think the thing that's really important is whether you're talking about planes, trains, or automobiles, everybody has something that we'd like to see. Oh, and throw in boats, because we've got ports too.
That's right.
So there's a lot of opportunities. Whatever we do, I think it needs to be a plan where we prioritize, because transportation's expensive and we need to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. And then to make sure that it's done in a manner that's effective. So you've got that connectivity, which is so, so important, and oftentimes something that's forgotten. So I do believe that there's a lot of opportunities for Connecticut with transportation. There's a lot of dollars there, so we need to make sure we're spending our dollars wisely, but it's something that the entire state would benefit from.
How about staying on the shoreline for a second, for example, Shoreline East? Is it used enough? Can they expand it? What is its future?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. There's a lot of discussions taking place about Shoreline East, adding additional trains from New London in particular to Old Saybrook, and then Old Saybrook to New Haven. But I don't know where the numbers fall right now, because the bulk of conversations that take place at the state legislature tend to focus around the New Haven line, so New Haven to New York City. I do know that there is a desire to try to set up a system in our state so that people don't have to have a car if you want to get from one place to the next. One of the big issues is going to be not only where those lines are, but how do you get somebody from that line to their place of employment. So, for example, we've got a number of members in Stamford who have people that take trains in from either New Haven or New York City to go to their employer in Stamford. When they get there, those companies actually have to run vans to get the people back and forth from the train station to the workplace. Not every company can do that. Not everybody has enough employees to be able to afford to run a van, et cetera. So what are you going to do? You have to make sure that once you have that first system in place, that there's a second one to support the people getting off that train and going to the workplace. There's a lot that Connecticut needs to take into consideration. It's not a little task, but it's an important one.
I love to fly, so I'll see if we can get a brief mention on Bradley International. It's an old airport, we know that. I don't know its quality of infrastructure compared to other airports nearby. Thoughts on that?
I think that they've been making attempts to improve Bradley and have done so over the years. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely, but they continue to look at ways to make the experience better for passengers so that when you arrive at Bradley, while you're waiting for your plane, you can find that there's more restaurants and stores, et cetera, to visit while you're waiting to catch your plane. The fact that they've increased the number of flights. For example, we have now a new flight to Ireland out of Bradley Airport. So they continue to work to try to improve Bradley's outreach as well as your experience while you're at Bradley. There's definitely more that can be done. I think that's true with any facility you go to. And the good news is that they're looking to make that happen.
They spend money on advertising. I work at a radio station too in the morning, and I hear the Bradley commercials on the air. So they're spreading the word on that.
And I think that one of the other things that's happening at Bradley is they're becoming a little bit more competitive cost-wise. So I live between two airports, one in Connecticut, one outside of Connecticut, and it used to be that flying outside of Connecticut was less expensive for me, and substantially so. I know that a couple of trips that I've got planned in the near future for work, I was able to get a flight out of Bradley at a competitive price, and so that was nice.
I live in the same neck of woods as you, and it's here's the thing for where we live, and this really is not for people in other parts of the state, but for where we are in southeastern Connecticut. To get to Bradley, you have to go through the city of Hartford because Bradley's in Windsor Locks. That's north of Hartford. If I wanted to go to TF Green, it's right off the highway and it's before Providence, so you avoid the city. Right. So there's a lure there. Now, Bradley can't control the flight rates, so that's not their thing. But they can, depending on convenience aspects, determine whether you'd want to go. You want to keep us in Connecticut. Spend the money in Connecticut.
Right. And I think that they really have been making improvements. So I'm glad to see that. It's nice to have options.
Yeah, and I like to fly. So let's take a break, one more break, and come right back. I'm with Bonnie Stewart, the VP and General Counsel of CBIA. One more break, and we're back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. So that is our show for today. Bonnie Stewart, VP and General Counsel for the Connecticut Business and Industry Association. As we're taping this show, it's after the governor's budget address, but I really think that a little ways down the road, this really comes more together, and we'll actually learn a little bit more so than we actually know right now as far as questions that will be asked and answers that will be able to be given, right?
Absolutely. As the governor's proposal moves from the governor to the legislature, people start picking through and lots of questions come up. So as we move along through the legislative process, there'll be a lot of opportunities to ask questions and get some answers.
One more time on the website.
CBIA.com.
Bonnie Stewart, thank you for being on the show again. Appreciate it. We learned a lot today.
Thanks for having me.
That is our show. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube site. Till next time, I'm Sean Murphy. Take care.